So Nick Jarman, Chair for Working Group 2, Installers. I'm here to run through our group's recommendations that some of you may have been or you've had a chance to review our reports. So I'd like to start off with saying it's been an interesting 14 months. The installer sector is extremely broad, and we could have and did unpack a lot of issues within the sector. And that was all part of our journey, really, because it was also about understanding the sector as well, and understanding what is out there currently in relation to proving competence. So I'll start off with our brief, because it is important, because we could have covered a whole host of things, and it was important we came out with something, and that was agreeing a comprehensive and coherent framework for assuring competence levels for those installing and maintaining fire safety and other safety critical systems for HRRBs. And these are our core recommendations. There was a whole host of other stuff within the report as well, but it was an industry adopted framework. It's important that the industry does adopt something moving forward. And it's the ultimate aim to have a combination of accredited third-party certification of companies, level 2 or 3 qualifications for individuals, a card scheme, and we had a lot of debate and discussion about a CSCS card, CPD in the form of refresher training and maintenance of individual skills. We talked about CPD already today. And all installers having a core knowledge of fire safety in buildings, and that training to be standardised and made mandatory. So what we found very quickly is within the sector, that last point, core knowledge of fire safety in buildings and training and information about it is pretty thin on the ground, unless you're doing a specific course or something that you've actually searched out individually. We'll come on to that subsequently. So, implications for the installer sector. So we started off, we wanted to understand the landscape, and that involved consultation. We went out, we had a whole series, we had 6 questions. We tried to keep it simple to a whole host of organisations. We got a whole load of answers back that gave us some data that we could actually set out and move forward on. And that collaboration was a key part of the work we carried out, and that needs to continue, because we need collaboration on finding consensus across our recommendations, but importantly in the use of education terminology required. We found educational terminology was interchangeable between certification, qualification, training, and we need to get to a standardised approach. We need full mapping of the installer sector in relation to competence achievements against current standards. So we need to know where we are currently across the HRRB sector. So the challenge we had is there is no HRRB sector, or there wasn't before the Grenfell report. So similar to the products, installers could be working across any host of different sectors, putting perhaps the nuclear and chemical industry aside for one moment. We found a lot of positive work out there. So, although it's a challenging sector, there are a number of installer sectors that are doing some really good work, and that whole sharing of what works well is an important part of the work we need to do moving forward. But we need a reduction in the sort of siloed approach. Buildings in design of, you can have any host of variations in relation to how a building is designed, and it's something that we saw across the whole installer sector into the way people go about training their installers. As I said, there are positives out there, but that whole variation proves or provides a lot of challenge as well. There's obviously clear benefits from third-party certification of installer companies. However, it needs to be assessed in relation to suitability for all, and it could be a long journey, but necessary for some. We're talking, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Upskilling required for individuals not currently achieving a level 2 or level 3 qualification. It's critical there is a common approach found for assessing an installer's competence at their point of work. They've got a relevant skills card, and that function is utilised. So out of those 5 recommendations at the beginning, that checking is just one key part of the recommendations going forward. A new and readily available training in relation to fire safety in buildings should be rolled out. So the Fire Sector Federation have already got a very good example, and there are others out there about simple videos that can be used in the industry to help upskill people, either at inductions or in engagement sessions, similar to what we do currently with health and safety. And then a standardised approach on measuring competence. So we've already heard this morning, competence not just about qualifications, it's about knowledge, experience and cultural behaviour as well. And with installers, that could be modified by just a simple thing of how they're actually feeling on a day-to-day basis when they go out and actually go and install something. Trying to pull in other sectors here, we need a joined up approach. Installers are part of a team, and there's core integration required with supervisors, project managers and designers. The whole sector is broad, and that provides a lot of data that we need to analyse in relation to how people go about measuring competence currently. So we do need to look digitally how we understand that data and make sure we use it efficiently. How projects are procured, we've touched on already, but we really need to make this about quality and expertise and skills. I'll just finish the last slide, I know I've overrun. Industry collaboration, so call to action. The iceberg is big. Sometimes I feel like we're still running down the side of it, and we need your feedback and help. So comments on the report would be the first call. I'll just slip to the last bullet point, really. So really, this is coming from me personally and from the group that as we've worked together. But if you employ someone who is classed as an installer, it's that, check their competence. Is it appropriate for the work that they're carrying out? And that's not something that has to wait on anything else, regulation or any other things that we might do as a group, but that's something that can happen tomorrow. So thank you very much for your time.
So I'm Pete Dawber, I'm the chair of Working Group 9. This was led on by the CIOB, but as I've mentioned already, Simon at the back, who's a structural engineer, we had contributions from across the sector. We had LABC involved, Institute of Clerk of Works, some construction managers from both off-site and on-site practice. So we had a whole range, and with lots of consultation again. I spent time with Nick's group as well to fully understand where the installers were going, and also to understand where the PM group, where their boundaries finished and started. So, without further ado then, we were asked to look at site supervisors, and that kind of took some time because site supervisors could be site agents, site managers, construction managers, the whole range of titles for someone who delivers that project on site. So we decided that the site supervisor that we were initially looking at then was the person, if you were to walk onto a construction project and ask who's in charge, it would be that person. But those now in the industry know that there's a lot of work that takes place off-site by another team who procure the materials, procure the subcontractors, and have to work very closely with the clients and the design team to make sure that what they're procuring is what is intended. So because of the discreteness of those two roles, we then decided that we need to look at the competencies of both. There are some common competencies, obviously, but there's some very discrete ones, which I'll outline in a second. We also then came up with a new role, and thank you, Simon, for preempting what I'm about to say, about a new role that we call the Independent Construction Assessor. And this is the scrutiny that Simon's alluded to already, which we'll talk about in a second, which raised lots of discussions at the steering group meetings. sometimes very heated, online and offline, but thankfully in the end we came to a consensus. A bit more about the CPM then and the site supervisor. Just to explain why there's a difference, the off-site team really need to procure competent companies. So we talked about competent organisations. So their role is to identify which organisations are competent to take that installation, and to obviously identify the materials and make sure they're compatible for both what's been prescribed by the design team, but what the contractor themselves can prescribe as well. When these people arrive to site, then it's the site supervisor's job to make sure that those individuals who arrive on site from a competent company are competent. So just because they come from a competent organisation, the site supervisor needs to make sure that those individuals are competent. So there's a different level of checking there. And their role clearly is to make sure that then the work that's undertaken on site complies with the design, revised or otherwise. But a most important role that we decided was to maintain the integrity of that installation. So it's okay having the installers come along, sign off the work as complete, if a follow-on package contractor causes damage to the integrity of that product. So a fundamental role of this individual as well is to ensure that continued compliance. So they were the kind of roles. And before I go on to this independent scrutiny that we're going to talk about for the third role, we want to stress very clearly that the responsibility, as far as we're concerned, sits with the contractor to deliver the design as agreed. It's fundamentally their responsibility. If we introduce independent scrutiny, we're not saying that this person is the one who will sign it off as fit. What we're saying is that person should present appropriate work for confirmation. So the risk sits and the responsibility sits with this team. I'm not going to use this analogy too much, but I'm sure we've all passed our test. I actually picked this up at a talk from Nick Jarman's installers group, a lady from, I think it was CITV, I can't remember now. But she talked about how many of us were competent drivers, asked how many of us to put our hands up who've been caught speeding. So we passed our test, we confirmed that we can drive competently, which includes driving within the prescribed speed limit, but many people in that room had points on their licence. So are they competent, are they not competent? And the argument really is that to drive the change about being competent and making sure that we abide by the rules was to bring in things like speed cameras, independent scrutiny that confirmed that yes, you are driving at the right speed because you haven't had a speeding ticket, or you've exceeded it because you have. So this idea about independent scrutiny to us was critical. And there's lots of evidence coming from Cross, and the figures that they quote at the moment is that 78 to 96% of all the incidents that were reported to them would not have happened had there been independent scrutiny. So this is independent sign-off to say that the design, the work, and the completion of that work is satisfactory. This role, we propose, goes direct to the client. It has to be independent. Many of you might be thinking, well, this is the old clerk of works role. We see it as maybe these people could come from that fraternity. But we also really see that these people are much more engaged at the early stages, advising the client and the design team at the key points where this scrutiny could take place. So not only when it could take place, but how it could take place and what evidence we could use to make sure that the event has taken place as it should. The kind of information they would use would be off-site, looking at prefabrication yards, looking at manufacturers, checking products if they're new and innovative. There would be on-site measurement through video, using technology, and certainly using things like body cams, where installers could wear body cams to confirm at their point of installation their work was satisfactory. So using all sorts of, I don't want to log in anywhere. So I just did. So using all sorts of testing facilities, but they would lead a team doing this. They're not the ones going to be around with a notebook and the recorder, but they would lead a team who could collect that information. So the contractor themselves could submit evidence. It could be video evidence, it could be digital evidence that was talked about before, but they would provide that evidence that the ICA collects. Because at the end of the contract, they need to be signing off a piece of paper to say that this building is fitted for purpose and meets the requirements that it had. In terms of our call to action, really, it's what do you think? What do you think of these ideas? We're not necessarily concerned about the site supervisor and the construction project manager, who, by the way, we believe would be the principal contractor. That's the difference as well. The construction project manager would be the principal contractor. But we're really keen to get some feedback as to whether or not we're going in the right direction. We would like some case studies where we could have a look at and maybe test out our ideas. And the last presentation done by a colleague, John Staves, we've since, Simon and I had a lengthy conversation with Amanda Long of the Considerate Constructors group, who are offering case studies for us to be able to test some of our ideas. But clearly, the more the merrier, the more we can engage with colleagues in this room to help that follow through. And as a good construction manager, I have finished with about 20 seconds left, which was my contingency, just in case I had some liquidated damages when I fell over.
Stephen Thompson, RICS, and I was the Secretary of Working Group 10 on Project Managers. The group was chaired by Charles Egbu, who many will know as President of CIOB. I'm keeping you from your lunch. Please do not be distracted by the catering team putting out the sandwiches on the tables. You're focusing here on me and on that screen. Don't worry about what's happening over there. Thank you very much indeed. I've forgotten now which button I pressed. Is it that one? There's an overview of what I'm going to cover within my short session. Our key recommendations from the working group were only twofold, and they basically are that anybody who calls themselves a project manager, more on that in a moment, anyone who calls themselves a project manager who's working on in-scope buildings, HRRBs, should be a member of a recognised professional body. And of course there are a number who qualify PMs to work within our construction industry. Secondly, the level of competence should be what is defined in APM terms, the Association for Project Management. When you look at their competency structure and framework, they have a number of tiers, as do many of the bodies. And the highest one of those is comprehensive. And so in our view, it was clearly important that actually they work to the highest level possible, given the nature of the projects that are taking place. What are the implications for the PM sector of the work that we and all the other groups have done? Well, firstly, there's a challenge over the definition of project manager. Be you working for a consultancy and appointed by your client to project manage the project. And this, of course, is something we're well aware has evolved over a number of years from the traditional model of designers individually reporting to their client, and now a model where a project manager is appointed to oversee and be answerable to their client. But equally, project managers work within contracting organisations, and there are project managers qualified by CIOB. And again, project managers work within client organisations. They might be called project sponsor, but effectively they're protecting their own company's interests as they develop and produce a project. And indeed, coming here today as half a dozen guys standing in high-vis vests looking down into a manhole, deciding what to do. One of them, on the back of his high-vis vest, it said project manager. And of course he was. He was managing the work that was going to be necessary on the drains underneath Blackfriars Road. We need to upskill the community. That's clear. There's a wider competency than just understanding the PM process. Now, this therefore goes to the heart of what is the PM doing and how qualified is he or she needing to be. So the architect presents their plans. This is what I'm thinking we're doing. Is the PM able to interrogate, to challenge, to ask the question, are you sure? Really? Now clearly, a project manager cannot be experienced in every single construction discipline, but they need to have confidence to know that the team that's been appointed is themselves competent. they're competent to judge that competency. That's a challenging area because many PMs will come from specific construction disciplines but won't necessarily need to know all. Qualification, accreditation, re-accreditation. I don't need to repeat all that. It's been said by many other speakers already. Clearly that's important within the context of the professional bodies that train and pass for practice project managers who work within the industry. But yes, of course, we ascribe to the need to have that independently accredited and then subsequently re-accredited again. And that's important, we feel, as an independent check that we're doing the right thing. CPD has in RICS world, certainly I can speak for that, been something that's compulsory, but not necessarily subject focused. You can do your CPD, get the hours you need to satisfy the institution, but it isn't necessarily focused on the issues that we're talking about within this report, and that needs to change. Others have said it, and it will be summed up at the end, I know, but it's not just about competency, doing the right thing, it's also ensuring there's a culture change within the industry. What therefore the implications? We're all in this together, that's clear, and Dame Judith made that very clear. You need to get your act together as a whole. It's not individual silos saying, well, we're all right, thank you very much, but everybody else is not working right. That's something we clearly need to address. What do you require me to do in the context of the wider industry? Why wait for legislation? That's been said as well. Let's crack on and do what we need to do. Other building types in scope, yes, and ultimately the whole of the industry, but not initially. We've already touched on procurement. I don't need to repeat all of that which was said as part of Working Group 11, but the issues clearly are raised when a client at that first meeting, if the consultant PM is the first appointment, it's really simple, Mr. PM. I need the project delivered on time and to budget. Qualities are given. How are you going to achieve that? And the reality of life is, these days, we've evolved into a culture that says the only solution, Mr. Client, is design and build, because you get it quick and you get it at a fixed price, and we chuck all the risk over the fence to the contractor. What is there not to like about that? Well, there's a big question mark over that initial procurement strategy in the context of going forward. And the PM attitude perhaps needs to change along with other members of the team. Finally, here's the call to action. I'm not going to read each of the questions out because you can well read them for yourselves. But the key message is please be involved. Please commit to responding to the consultation, because we don't know if we've got it right or wrong. And it's easy for us as a group to say this is what we think the right answer is, but we need a collective response from the industry as a whole. Thank you very much.
Peter, one for you. Independent construction assessor. My mind goes back to the independent certifier on PFI contracts, and in some cases they were less than effective. So I'm not quite sure of the thinking around that. And who would be the employer for the independent construction assessor?
We saw that as the client. It would be the client who would be the contractually linked to the ICA. I think how we saw this role was a much more proactive role, right from the very start of the project, to help the design team to identify key points where, working backwards from the end, that we need to present a building which can truly evidence that everything has been complied with. How do we get to that point so we can sign the building off? So that was the route that we took. We didn't look at the PFI route at all. We started quite afresh with that. But the whole sole purpose of this role, different to a clerk of works, is Look, we had many discussions with the architecture group as well about how do you ensure that your design has been complied with, and it's well when we can get to site so we kind of saw this role emerging, but we saw it as being a much more proactive role, supportive, and also a conduit as well for the kind of whistle that has been referred to, but we kind of call out, where people feel that they can approach an independent person to say, I don't think this is right. Whether it's a contractor, whether it's a package contractor, but they can report and have a safe place to report those things up as well.
I'm reiterating a point that I made earlier on, and I'm actually a little bit alarmed at the way some of the conversations have gone, that there is this emphasis on the individual being the duty holder. For example, a principal contractor is not going to be the site manager. They will work for the principal contractor. The principal contractor is going to be the body corporate. So many principal designers. Some people seem to be thinking principal designer is a new role. Peter Capelhorn was absolutely right. It's not. It exists. It's in CDM already. CDM isn't going anywhere. There's a little act called the Interpretation Act. So however the new legislation is phrased and formed, the principal designer and principal contractor will have the same definition as already exists.
Yeah, we know that, and that would be that's why we said it would be the CPM, the construction project manager. But you still need a named individual. It was made clear earlier today that individuals will be identified as representative of that organisation, as the lead for the principal contractor, and I guess the same for the principal designer and for the building safety manager as well. An individual will be named. We had concerns about, well, what happens when that person, which they will in our industry, will move to a different company? Does that responsibility then sit back with the original contracting organisation, or does it transfer that responsibility with the individual? So there are things to work out. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is the organisation, but there will be a named individual in that organisation.
Hi, thanks. It's Malcolm Shields. I'm chair of the IRG Construction Group for Pete. Maybe a question and maybe something you might not have looked at in terms of the ICA that you're proposing. Have you looked at the role of the NEC, the supervisor, NEC3 in sort of P22? Because it's something that, and you're asking for case study information, it might well be worth looking in that area. You might get some useful information.
No, thank you, but we will. I'll have a chat afterwards if you can, please, and guide me to that.
I was thinking about the life management of the building when you're talking about from start to finish. What involvement do you think that fire safety, fire risk assessors can have in this role at the start? Because I'm currently doing some consultancy for a couple of days a week for a particular housing organisation, and now I actually go with them when the building's first designed. I go with them in the planning stages. At the building stages, I go independently in to check that the fire stopping's being done the way I want it to. Because my experience has been, and I wrote this in Inside Housing a few years ago, it's the buildings that have been built in the last 20 years that have got the biggest problems, not the buildings, not the older buildings. And it was what was added to Grenfell caused it the major problem. If they hadn't have added that, then you wouldn't have probably had an outward spread of fire.
I mean, it's quite clear for every one of us, there's not one individual in the world who could have all this knowledge. The role of the ICA is to know somebody who does for that particular aspect. So I would, as again, working back from what needs to be provided at the end, is to seek out and get consultation with competent individuals to say, could you come and confirm for me that this has been built, designed and maintained with integrity? So they would be the kind of, running the folder, if you like, but seeking expert advice and knowledge from other competent people.
And clearly, as I said, there's an interface here with the role of the project manager, effectively sitting above that, but needing to work with individuals or corporate firms as described. It has to be a whole team effort, clearly, for it to work effectively and efficiently.
Fiona Critchley, Door and Hardware Federation. A question on the installation side. We've talked a lot about independent scrutiny generally and third-party certification. We would like to know, will the Building Safety Scrutiny Committee be publishing a listing of the certification schemes and the appropriate qualifications of each sector?
I'm not sure if I can't speak for the overarching competency body, but one thing we have talked about in the group is having this register of registers. So, people need to demonstrate that they're competent, and we need to have a record of those individuals as well. And if just use the installer sector as an example, I guess the way we see that is measuring competency and getting that data, and organisations understanding the installers that they have working for them that meet that threshold. That information needs to be shared with, whether it's through procurement or with contractors, so they know the people that are turning up to install whatever it is they've got to install, they've met a threshold of competency that means they can do what they're going to do that day.
And if I may, from a public sector perspective, we own an awful lot of property that is historically time served, and it's the refit, refurb, and it's the ubiquitous man in his white van that turns up and core hole drills through a cladding system that we fear. And from that perspective, we've been advocates of something similar to like the gas safe register, so that actually down to the individual, anybody walking onto what was an HRRB, but in future will be in-scope buildings, will have some form of identification. It's a lot easier to control on a major new build construction project site, and certainly for ourselves in Birmingham City Council, we mandate, and it's not a government thing, we mandate locally that everyone carries a CSCS card. That includes myself as a client walking on site, that includes all our consultants and all of our supply chain, and then we have a means to be able to at least know who's working on site. It's not a brilliant, there are better things we could do there, and I think it's one of the things we're looking to develop. But absolutely, this idea of project, product, and personal provenance on the sites is absolutely key to us.
Hello, Cathy Clark, CEO of the Single Ply Roofing Association. I've been involved with Working Group 2. I firstly want to say how pleased I was that recommendation 29 and 31 regarding CSCS cards and level 2 qualifications is in the report. But I would like to state that it is those teeth that we've just been referring to that is the absolutely crucial thing. We've got in recommendation 7, government should take the lead and commit to requiring that any company or individual working on government construction projects should meet the competence framework set out within this report. And then local authorities and the wider public and private sectors should be encouraged to follow suit. There's no teeth there at all. And I've lived through certain sectors that have tried to get CSCS cards, qualifications sorted out, and then insisting, the heritage sector, saying you won't get on site if you don't have a card. The appropriate marketing, pushing, educating to make the industry aware that that was the case didn't happen. So when the date came that was given, 2010, out of the 95,000 they'd identified that could have a card, only 3,000 had got one. So what did the agencies that had promised that they wouldn't let people on site do? They turned around and said, we can't, because not enough people have got them. So this is happening again, and we have to have those teeth to stop that and to make sure. So we need to set a proper deadline, and we need to say that it will be legislated if we possibly could. I know it's an industry thing, but I don't think industry will do it.
I completely concur with that from a local government perspective, and we don't have our MHCLG colleagues here, and from our perspective we would desperately push down a legislative route. As you know, in local governments and 400 odd different local authorities, we're each to our own. We can do as we choose on our patch. There are a number of us that work cumulatively and collaboratively together. I mean, I can see another colleague here from the LGA here today. And it's that best practice that we push for. We absolutely concur with what you're saying there. But we want the card to have teeth. It can't just be a badge. There's too many guilds of craftsmen out there that sort of float around with a sticker on the van, and it means nothing. But actually, to the layperson, to the resident that's getting the cable TV footing, they know no different. It's got to mean something. It's got to be something that has got those teeth.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's a very, very tough question as well that the industry needs to answer, and I think there is, part of what we did as a working group. We want to work with the industry. It's got to be a part of moving forward and changing. I think if we went straight to that point, there's areas of work and buildings that would stop tomorrow in the industry, and in some ways that would be a good thing because it would stop the stuff that is wrong and is not good enough. But I guess it's temporary in that there's a lot of positive work going on out there and people striving to focus on quality. I guess it's just that balance of when does that come into force and how does it come into force and across which sectors.